He laughed, not a polite laugh, not an awkward laugh, a real one, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and unguarded, the kind a man lets out when he thinks he's safe. He looked around my living room, at my second-hand bookshelf and my plain cotton curtains, and he actually laughed. I didn't say a word. Somewhere down the hall, my neighbor Patricia's door opened. I heard her footsteps slow, and then I heard her voice, quiet, certain, the way people speak when they already know the ending, Derek, she said. Do you know who you're sitting with? He didn't. Nobody ever does. Not at first. I'm not angry about it anymore. I'm just tired in the way you get tired after carrying something heavy for a very long time. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your country and your local time right now in the comments. It always means something to see who's out there. Now let me take you back to where this really started. A few hours earlier, I almost didn't go. That's the part nobody sees. The part that happens in a bathroom mirror at 6:15 on a Friday evening, when you're 48 years old and you're standing there looking at yourself in a blouse you ironed twice because you wanted to feel like you'd made an effort, and some quiet, tired part of you is already negotiating an exit before you've even walked out the door. I could cancel. I'd done it before. A text, an apology, a vague reference to work. Nobody questions work. Not when you've spent 22 years training everyone around you to accept that work is the answer to everything. But Veronica had called me that afternoon. My sister, 44 years old, and still the only person on earth who can make me feel 16 with a single sentence. You're going, she said. It wasn't a question. I haven't decided, Latoya Renee Powell. You have been decided for the last 40 minutes. You're going. Wear the burgundy blouse. I was already wearing the burgundy blouse. I didn't tell her that. I said goodbye, put the phone down on my kitchen counter, the plain white tile counter in my plain, modest kitchen, and looked around the apartment the way I sometimes do when I'm trying to remember why I chose it. People always assume I live here because it's what I can afford. That assumption has never bothered me the way it probably should. The apartment is on the 4th floor of a building in Arlington, Virginia, 12 minutes from my office on a bad traffic day, 8 on a good one. It is not large. The living room fits a sofa, a reading chair, a bookshelf, and a lamp I've had since my first real job. The kitchen is functional. The bedroom has a window that faces east, which means I wake up with light instead of an alarm most mornings. There is no doorman. There is no valet parking. There is a coin laundry on the 2nd floor that smells like fabric softener and other people's weekends, and I find that oddly comforting. I own it outright. I own a lot of things outright, but we'll get to that. His name was Derek Mason. We'd been introduced through a mutual acquaintance at a function 3 weeks earlier. One of those charity dinners where everyone is performing a version of themselves they hope will be mistaken for the real thing. He had been charming in the way that men who sell things for a living are charming. Smooth transitions, easy eye contact, the ability to make you feel like the most interesting person in the room for exactly as long as it serves them. He was a real estate broker, mid-range residential, mostly Northern Virginia suburbs. He had a business card with a glossy headshot and a tagline that said, "Your home, your legacy." I remember thinking the tagline was trying a little too hard. I kept the card anyway. He'd called twice before asking me to dinner. The first time I let it go to voicemail. The second time I picked up because Veronica had texted me 30 seconds earlier, saying answer the phone, Latoya, and I still don't know how she knew. I've stopped asking. Dinner was at a place in Georgetown. Not flashy, but intentional. The kind of restaurant a man chooses when he wants to seem like he knows things. I'll give him that. The food was good. The wine was good. For the first 40 minutes, so was the conversation. He talked about his listings. About a house in McLean he'd sold for $2.3 million, the negotiation he'd won, the buyers who'd almost walked. He talked about square footage the way some people talk about children, with genuine pride, specific detail, visible emotion. I listened. I asked questions. I am good at listening. 22 years of budget meetings. Congressional briefings and interagency negotiations will do that to you. When he finally asked what I did, I gave him the answer I always give. I work for the government. He nodded. The nod of a man filing information under not particularly interesting and moving on. Federal? Yes. Agency? Defense adjacent. He smiled. So you can't tell me I could, I said. It's just not that exciting. That's not entirely true. But it's not entirely false either. Depends on your definition of exciting. I've sat in rooms where a single line item in a spreadsheet represented the difference between a weapons program surviving or dissolving. I've testified before subcommittees. I've had my signature required on documents that generals were waiting on. None of that sounds exciting when you describe it at a dinner table. It sounds like paperwork, which technically it is. He steered the conversation back to real estate. He asked about my apartment casually, the way people ask when they're actually asking something else. Arlington's a good market, he said. You renting or owning? Owning. His eyebrows moved just slightly, recalibrating. Nice. How long? 11 years. Good investment. You ever think about upgrading? Market's shifted a bit, but there are still opportunities in. I like where I am, I said. Another small recalibration. I watched it happen. I've watched it happen many times. People hear I like where I am, and they translate it one of two ways. Either she can't afford more or she has no ambition. Derek Mason, I would learn, was the kind of man who defaulted to the first translation. We finished dinner. He paid, which I noted. I offered to split it, which he declined, which I also noted. The offer and the decline tell you more about a person than the bill itself. Outside, the air had gone cool the way October air does in Virginia. Not cold yet, but honest. He walked me to my car, which is a 7-year-old navy blue Accord that I keep clean and serviced and have no plans to replace. He glanced at it. Just once. Just briefly. But I saw it. I should have said goodnight at the car. Instead, when he asked if I wanted to continue the evening, if maybe he could come up for coffee, I said yes. Veronica would say I said yes because I was curious. She might be right. I've spent 22 years assessing risk, and something in me wanted more data before I made a final assessment of Derek Mason. The elevator ride up to the 4th floor was quiet. He looked at the hallway when the doors opened. The plain carpet, the standard lighting, the numbered doors. He didn't say anything yet, but I saw the arithmetic happening behind his eyes. And I already knew what answer he was going to arrive at. The coffee was already made. I'd set the timer before I left that evening. An old habit, the kind you develop when your mornings run on 15-minute intervals and you've learned to front-load every decision you can. French roast, medium strength, in the plain white pot I've had for 9 years. I poured 2 cups without asking how he took his. He struck me as a black coffee man. I was right. He took the mug without comment, which I appreciated. He walked into the living room the way people walk into a space they are already measuring. I watched him do it. I've watched a lot of people walk into rooms over the years. Congressional staffers, deputy secretaries, brigadier generals who thought a budget meeting was beneath them until they realized I was the one who decided whether their program survived the next fiscal quarter. You learn to read the walk, the way the eyes move, whether they're looking for something to admire or something to confirm. Derek's eyes were doing the second thing. He paused at the bookshelf. It is floor to ceiling, that bookshelf. Built by a carpenter in Baltimore whose number I still have. Dark walnut, slightly uneven on the 3rd shelf where the wood took the humidity wrong one summer. I've never fixed it. I like the imperfection. It holds accounting theory, military history, 3 years of congressional budget justification documents I kept for reference, a worn copy of their eyes. We're watching God that my mother gave me when I was 19, and approximately 40 years of accumulated reading that has no organizing principle except that every book on it meant something to me at some point. Derek looked at it the way you look at a thing you don't understand and have decided is probably not worth understanding. You read all of these? He asked. Most of them. He moved on. The furniture is what it is. A sofa I chose for comfort over appearance, wide, deep, covered in a fabric the color of fog that has held its shape for 6 years. A reading chair with a floor lamp beside it that I bought at an estate sale in Alexandria for $40 and had reupholstered once. A coffee table that is plain wood, no glass, no ornament. On the wall above the sofa, one painting, a watercolor of the Shenandoah Valley at dusk, painted by a woman who sells her work out of a studio near Luray, Virginia. I bought it because it looked like peace. I still think it does. Derek stood in front of it. "Local artist?" he asked. "Yes, again, that sound. The sound of a man keeping score." He sat down on the sofa, looked around once more, and I saw it, the full assessment completing itself behind his eyes. The final number arriving, the verdict settling. He smiled, not unkindly. "That was almost worse. It's cozy," he said, cozy. The word people use when they mean small. "Thank you," I said. I sat in the reading chair, kept my coffee cup in both hands. Outside the window, the lights of Arlington spread themselves across the October dark, and somewhere in the building Patricia Howard's television was audible through the wall. The low murmur of a late-night news program, the sound of a woman who had seen enough of the world to watch it from a comfortable chair without surprise. Patricia has lived in this building for 19 years. She moved in 2 years after I did. For the first 6 months, we were cordial hallway people. Nods, held elevator doors, the occasional comment about the weather. Then one November afternoon, the elevator was broken, and we walked up 4 flights of stairs together, and by the 2nd floor we were talking, and by the 4th floor we were friends. She spent 35 years as a senior administrative officer at the Pentagon. She has sat in more rooms than most people know exist. She knows the architecture of power, not the visible kind, the kind that gets photographed and quoted, but the structural kind, the kind that holds the weight, the kind that has no title on the organizational chart, but is the reason the chart functions at all. She knows exactly what I do. She knows because 14 years ago, when I was still a GS-13 fighting for a line item that nobody above me wanted to fight for, she was the one who told me which door to knock on, and how hard. I've never forgotten that. I don't think I ever will. I heard her door that evening, a little after 9. The soft click of it opening, the pause in the hallway. She sometimes stands there for a moment before her evening walk to the vending machine on the 2nd floor, a ritual she has maintained with the commitment of a religious practice. Cheese crackers and a ginger ale every night at 9. She says it keeps her honest. Derek was mid-sentence about a condominium development in Tyson's Corner when I heard her footsteps slow outside my door. I don't know if she heard his voice. I don't know if the door was open a fraction more than usual. I don't know what made her pause. Patricia Howard. In my experience, operates on an intelligence system that has never fully revealed its sources. What I know is that she knocked, to 2 knocks, light. Our signal for "I'm not intruding," just checking. One moment I called. I opened the door. She was standing in the hallway in her cardigan, the gray one with the loose button on the left cuff that she keeps meaning to fix, ginger ale already in hand. She looked at me. Then she looked past me into the living room, at Derek sitting on my sofa. Something moved across her face, fast, controlled. The expression of a woman who has spent 35 years in rooms where you do not let your face say what your mind is thinking. But I've known her long enough to read the fast ones. It was recognition, not of Derek. Of the situation. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. "To me, not to him. I just wanted to check you got your mail. The box was stuck again." "I did, thank you." She nodded. And then, because Patricia Howard has never done an accidental thing in her life, she looked directly at Derek and said, pleasantly, conversationally, as if it were the most natural question in the world, "Have you two known each other long?" Derek smiled the smile of a man who thinks he is being charmed by an elderly neighbor. "First date, actually. Is that right?" She looked at him for a moment. Quiet. Measuring. The way I imagine she looked at a great many people over 35 years. "Well," she said finally, "you're in very good company." She said goodnight and walked toward the stairwell. Derek watched her go. then turned back to me with an amused expression. "Sweet lady," he said. "She is," I agreed. I sat back down in my reading chair and picked up my coffee cup. Sweet, I thought. Among other things, he started with the kitchen. Not loudly, not cruelly. That's the thing about men like Derek Mason. They don't announce their contempt. They dispense it in small, polished increments, each one deniable, each one wrapped in the language of helpfulness or observation or casual curiosity. You could transcribe everything he said that evening and show it to a stranger, and they might say, "That doesn't sound so bad." And they would be right. Technically, it wasn't so bad. But I've spent 22 years reading documents where the real meaning lives 3 layers below the surface language. I know how to read what isn't written. I know how to hear what isn't said. He stood in the doorway of my kitchen and looked at the white tile countertops, the plain oak cabinets, the refrigerator that is 8 years old and runs perfectly and has a small dent on the lower left corner from when I moved in and the dolly slipped, he said, swirling the last of his coffee. "Kitchen's where the value is. In any property, buyers always go straight to the kitchen." "I'm not selling," I said. "No, I know. I just mean if you ever did, a renovation would do a lot for the resale. Granite, new appliances, maybe open it up a little." He gestured vaguely at the wall between the kitchen and the living room. "Take that down. You'd have a whole different feel." "I like the feel I have," I said. He smiled. Patient, indulgent. The smile of a man who believes he is offering wisdom to someone not quite equipped to receive it. He moved back into the living room, sat down, looked at the window. "What do you pay here?" he asked. Just like that. No preamble. The question of a man who believes that property values are a reasonable topic for a first evening in someone's home. "I own it," I said. Right. What'd you pay when you bought?" I looked at him for a moment. "Why?" He laughed a little. "Professional habit. Sorry." "Occupational hazard. It's fine," I said. Because it was fine. Information is just information. What matters is what a person does with it. I told him the number. It was the 2013 market price for a 1-bedroom in this building, which was not a remarkable number in either direction. His face did the thing again, the arithmetic, the assessment, the verdict. I watched him place me on his internal map of the world. A woman who bought a modest apartment 11 years ago and hadn't moved up. A government worker, defense adjacent, whatever that meant. Comfortable, probably. Not ambitious. Clearly, he nodded slowly. "Smart to buy rather than rent," he said. "Generous of him, thank you," I said. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at it. "Veronica, how's it going?" She'd texted, then 2 seconds later, "Never mind. I can tell from the fact that you haven't texted me. You're either having a wonderful time or you're dissociating." Which one? I turned the phone face down. Derek was looking at the painting above the sofa again. The Shenandoah watercolor. He tilted his head slightly, the way people do when they're trying to find merit in something they've already decided has none. "You ever think about getting something bigger?" he asked. "The painting?" "The apartment." There it was. The real question finally arriving without its polite packaging. I set my coffee cup down on the plain wood table and looked at him with the same expression I use in budget hearings when a junior staffer asks a question that reveals they haven't read the brief. "Define bigger," I said. He spread his hands. "Easy, expansive. More space. Better building. You've been here 11 years. You've probably got decent equity. Market's been good to Arlington. You could leverage what you have here into something that really reflects." He paused, seemed to choose his next word with minor care. "Your stage of life? Your stage of life." I turned that phrase over in my mind and examined it the way I examine a financial document when I suspect a number has been moved somewhere it doesn't belong. Your stage of life, meaning a woman of 48 in government work should have accumulated the visible markers of progress, should be living somewhere that announces her arrival, should have by now a home that performs success rather than simply housing a life. "I see," I said. "I don't mean anything by it," he said quickly. "It's just you clearly work hard. You should be living somewhere that shows that." I looked at him for a long moment. Outside the window, a car passed on the street below. Somewhere above us, a door closed. In the wall to my left, Patricia's television murmured on. The news had ended and something else had begun, something with a quieter frequency, a voice reading rather than broadcasting. I thought about the townhouse in Alexandria. 4 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, a backyard with an oak tree that drops acorns every October in a way that is inconvenient and beautiful in equal measure. I bought it in 2016, paid it off in 2021. My tenants are a young family, 2 children, a dog named something I always forget and have to ask about every time they send their rent. They painted the front door red, which I didn't expect and found I didn't mind. I thought about the duplex in Baltimore. Both units occupied, both leases current, both generating income that I redirect into a separate account I think of as the long game. I thought about the house in the Shenandoah Valley. The one the watercolor above my sofa is painted from. The one I drive to on certain Saturdays when I need to remember what silence sounds like. The one that is paid off and empty and waiting and mine. I thought about all of this and I said nothing, because Derek Mason had not asked about any of those things. He had looked at my kitchen and my reading chair and my second-hand lamp and my plain cotton curtains, and he had built an entire portrait of a woman from those details, and he was so certain of the portrait that it hadn't occurred to him to ask whether it was accurate. That was his real mistake, not the rudeness, which was manageable, not the presumption, which was familiar. The mistake was the certainty. My phone buzzed again. I knew without looking that it was Veronica. I knew without reading it what it probably said. From down the hallway came the soft sound of Patricia's door opening again. She was earlier than usual for her return trip, or maybe she hadn't gone far. I heard her footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate. The footsteps of a woman who has never been in a hurry because she has always known exactly where she was going. Derek was still talking. Something about comparable listings. Something about the spring market. I picked up my coffee cup, found it empty, and set it back down, and waited. He asked the question at 9:47. I know because I glanced at the clock on the microwave when he said it. A reflex from years of timed meetings, of knowing exactly how many minutes remain before a decision has to be made. 9:47. The number lodged itself in my memory the way certain numbers do when they arrive at the exact moment something shifts. I guess what I'm saying is, Derek said, leaning back against my sofa cushions with the ease of a man who has decided he understands the room. If you've been here 11 years and you're still here, what's the holdup? What's stopping you from moving somewhere that actually fits where you are in your career? He said it gently. He genuinely thought he was being helpful. I set down my coffee cup. I looked at him the way I look at a spreadsheet when the numbers don't match. Not with anger, not with surprise, but with a kind of focused, quiet attention that has, over 22 years, made a considerable number of people, in a considerable number of rooms, feel suddenly uncertain about what they thought they knew. What makes you think this doesn't fit? I asked. He laughed. Not the full laugh from earlier in the evening. This one was smaller, more careful, the laugh of a man who senses he may have miscalculated but isn't sure where. I just mean, you're clearly capable, you work hard, you've been in your field a long time. A person at your level should be my level, I said. Yeah, and what level do you think that is? A pause, shorter than it should have been. I don't know exactly. Mid-level federal? GS 12, 13 maybe? I looked at him for a moment. Then I said very quietly, the way I say things when I want them to land without velocity, I'm a GS 15, Derek. Step 10, I've been at that grade for 6 years. Before that I spent 16 years working every grade below it. He blinked. Once, GS 15, Step 10 is the ceiling of the general schedule pay system. It is the grade below the senior executive service. It is the grade at which you are no longer climbing. You have arrived, and the only place left to go is into a rarefied tier that most federal employees spend entire careers approaching without reaching. I did not tell him any of this. I did not need to. The number was enough. Oh, he said, and my title, I said, is Senior Defense Financial Manager. I oversee a portfolio of approximately $2.4 billion in annual defense appropriations. I have done this for the last 8 years. Before that, I was the deputy, and before that, I was an analyst, and the entire 22 years has been in service of making sure that the people who make decisions about national security have accurate, defensible numbers to make them with. The room was very quiet. Outside, a siren moved through the city far enough away to be ambient rather than urgent. The refrigerator in the kitchen made its small, reliable sound. Patricia's television had gone silent. Derek's mouth opened slightly. Closed. Opened again. I didn't, he started. No, I said. You didn't. I heard the knock at the door before I'd finished the sentence. 2 knocks, light. Our signal. I stood and opened the door, and Patricia Howard was standing in his hallway in her gray cardigan, cheese crackers in one hand, ginger ale in the other, with the expression of a woman who has been waiting in a hallway for a specific moment and has correctly identified its arrival. She looked at me, then at Derek, then back at me. I'm sorry again, she said, in a tone that was not sorry at all. I couldn't help overhearing. The door wasn't fully latched. She looked at Derek with the steady, calibrated gaze of a woman who has spent 35 years at the Pentagon watching powerful people underestimate other powerful people. I heard you mention her grade. Derek looked at her. He had forgotten about Patricia. Men like Derek tend to file elderly neighbors under ambient detail and leave them there. Patricia Howard. She said, extending the hand with the ginger ale in it, then switching hands with the composure of someone who has shaken 10,000 hands in the right order. I was Senior Administrative Officer, Office of the Undersecretary of Defense, Comptroller Division. 35 years. She smiled pleasantly. I worked 2 floors above Latoya for 9 of those years. Derek shook her hand, slowly. Like a man whose body was continuing a social function while his mind was elsewhere, rapidly revising. She's being modest, as usual, Patricia said, nodding toward me. Which is her only consistent professional flaw, in my opinion. She turned back to Derek. Do you know what they call her? In the building. The people who've worked with her long enough to have a name for her. Derek shook his head. He could not speak the ledger, Patricia said. Plainly. Like a fact. Because a ledger doesn't perform, and it doesn't flinch, and it doesn't tell you what you want to hear. It tells you what's true. And when a 4-star general needed to know whether a program was viable or whether it was going to collapse the next fiscal year, the call didn't go to his staff. It went to her. Silence. Derek looked at me. I looked back at him without expression. Not cold, not triumphant, just present. The way I look at the end of every meeting when everything has been said and the numbers are on the table and there is nothing left to argue about. The apartment, I said after a moment, I own it. I also own a townhouse in Alexandria, a duplex in Baltimore, and a house in the Shenandoah Valley. I paused. All of them are paid off. I chose to live here because it is 12 minutes from my office. It faces east, and I have never once needed my home to tell anyone anything about me. I watched the information arrive. I watched his face do the thing faces do. And a structure they built on confident, untested assumptions meets a single load-bearing fact it wasn't designed to hold. He didn't crumble. I'll give him that. Men with pride rarely crumble quickly. They compress, they go still, they get very, very careful with their next words. Latoya, he said. I didn't mean to. I know, I said. And I did. That was the honest part. He hadn't meant to. He'd simply looked at my curtains and my lamp and my second-hand bookshelf, and he'd decided he knew the whole story. He hadn't meant any harm by it. He'd just been wrong. Completely, thoroughly, foundationally wrong. Patricia gave a small, satisfied nod, bid us both good night, and walked down the hallway toward her apartment with the unhurried confidence of a woman who has done exactly what she came to do. The door clicked shut behind her. Derek and I sat with the silence she left behind. 9:51. 4 minutes since the question. 4 minutes to dismantle an entire architecture of assumption. I picked up my empty coffee cup, looked at it, and stood. I'll make another pot. I said, because some conversations, once they've started, deserve to be finished properly. The second pot of coffee brewed while neither of us spoke. That's something I've learned over 22 years of rooms where the air changes and nobody knows quite how to breathe in the new atmosphere. Sometimes the most useful thing you can do is give a moment somewhere to go. The sound of water heating, the quiet mechanical sigh of the machine settling into its work. Those sounds do something. They fill the space without demanding anything from it. Derek sat on the sofa with his hands around his empty mug. He had the look of a man who was doing serious internal accounting. I recognized the look. I've seen it on the faces of program managers when I've had to tell them. The numbers don't support what they've promised their leadership. That specific combinations of recalibration and something that wants to be dignity but isn't quite sure how to stand up straight yet. I poured 2 cups and brought them back. He took his without speaking. I sat in the reading chair. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Yes. Why don't you tell people? What you do, what you have." I looked at the painting above his head. The Shenandoah Valley at dusk. The particular shade of amber the painter had caught in the last light over the ridge. The way the shadows in the valley floor were blue rather than gray, which is the true color of mountain shadows in October and something most people never notice. "I did tell people," I said, "for a long time. Not boasting, I don't mean that. Just being honest when asked. Giving a real answer instead of a vague one." I paused. "It didn't always go the way you'd hope." He waited. "There was a man," I said, "before. My husband. I don't talk about Marcus often. Not because it still hurts in the acute way that passed years ago, slowly, the way a bruise fades rather than disappears overnight. But because explaining that marriage requires explaining a version of myself I've mostly made peace with and don't particularly want to excavate for strangers over coffee." But Derek had earned an honest answer. Or maybe I'd decided it was time to give one regardless of who was in the room. "We met in my second year at Defense," I said. He was a contractor, smart man. Genuinely smart, not the performed kind. We were together 3 years before we married, and for the first 2 of those years everything was good. We were building something together. Or I thought we were. I looked at my coffee cup. He proposed the same month I made GS13. Which I know sounds like a coincidence, and probably was. I chose to believe it was. Derek said nothing. He was listening now. Actually listening. Not the performance of listening he'd been doing at dinner, the maintained eye contact and the timed responses, but the real kind, where a person goes still because they need to hear what comes next. "We were married 6 years, I said. The first 3 were good, genuinely good. We bought the townhouse in Alexandria together. That was his idea. He wanted the space, the yard, the address. I paid the larger share of the down payment because by then I was a GS14 and his contract had ended, and he was between projects. I didn't mind. That's not a complaint. I just need you to understand the architecture." I stood up and walked to the window. Arlington at night is not a spectacular view. It is not Manhattan, not a harbor, not a skyline that justifies a postcard. It is the honest view of a working city. Office buildings with their lights still on at 10 o'clock, the geometry of parking structures, the red signal of a radio tower blinking in patient rhythm on the horizon. I've stood at this window so many times that I've stopped seeing it as a view and started seeing it as a clock. The city working, the city resting, the city continuing regardless. The year I made GS15, I said, was the year he left? I heard Derek set his mug down. He said he'd tried to be supportive. And I believe him. I think he did try, in the beginning. But there's a kind of man for whom a woman's success is something he can admire from a distance, and something else entirely when he has to live inside it. When his name is on a joint tax return and the number next to hers is considerably larger. When people at a party ask what he does, and then ask what she does, and he watches the conversation turn toward her, I paused. Marcus is not a bad man. I want to be clear about that. He is a man who needed to be the largest thing in the room he was standing in, and I kept making the room too small for that. I turned back from the window. He took his name off the townhouse deed before he left. That was the kindest thing he did. He said he didn't want anything that was mine. I think he meant it as a wound. I received it as a gift. The duplex in Baltimore, I bought that the year after the divorce was finalized. Not to prove anything, not as a statement. I bought it because I had been carrying a grief that needed somewhere to go, and I have always, under pressure, turned toward work, toward the concrete and the legible. A property with a number attached to it, a ledger entry that would not leave and would not change its mind. The house in the Shenandoah Valley came 3 years after that. I drove out on a Saturday with no particular intention and found a listing at an estate sale and walked through a house that smelled like pine floors and old fireplaces, and something that I can only describe as stillness, the kind that accumulates in a place over decades and can't be manufactured or purchased separately from the walls that contain it. I made an offer that afternoon. I paid it off in 4 years. The apartment I have now. I bought this after the Shenandoah house, after I had everything else. I chose it last, deliberately, the way you choose the simplest solution after you've confirmed that the complicated ones all work. I didn't need it to be impressive. I needed it to be mine. I needed it to be quiet and close to work and oriented east so that the light would find me in the mornings without being asked. I sat back down in the reading chair. So when you asked what was stopping me from moving somewhere that fits my career, I said, the honest answer is nothing. I'm already exactly where I chose to be. I just chose differently than you expected. Derek was quiet for a long time. Outside, the radio tower blinked. Red, dark, patient and reliable and indifferent to everything below it. I owe you an apology, he said. You do, I agreed. I made a lot of assumptions. You did? I didn't ask enough questions. No, I said. You didn't, he nodded slowly. The nod of a man who is doing something uncomfortable and doing it anyway, which I respect even when the discomfort is entirely self-created. The ledger, he said quietly, as if testing the weight of it. That's what they call me. He looked around the apartment one more time. The bookshelf, the lamp, the plain cotton curtains, the watercolor above the sofa, and I watched the room rearrange itself in his perception. The same objects. Entirely different meaning. It's a good apartment, he said. I know, I said. I've always known. He stayed another hour. I didn't plan for that. I don't think he did either. But there is a particular kind of conversation that, once it finds its real footing, becomes difficult to leave. Not because it is comfortable, but because it is honest. And honesty at that depth has a gravity to it that social politeness can't quite overcome. He asked questions, real ones, this time. Not the transactional questions of a man cataloging a woman's market value, but the slower, more careful questions of someone who has realized he arrived at the wrong address and is now genuinely trying to find the right one. He asked about the work, what it actually felt like to manage numbers at that scale. I told him it felt, most days, like being the only person in the room who has read the entire document. Everyone else has read the summary. The summary is accurate as far as it goes, but summaries leave things out, and what gets left out is almost always the thing that matters most when the situation becomes complicated. My job, for 22 years, has been to know what the summary omitted. He asked if it was lonely. I thought about that longer than I expected to. Sometimes I said, not the work itself. The work is company enough. But the position, yes. There's a particular loneliness in being the person who knows the full number when everyone around you is negotiating with a partial one. You can't share what you know. You can't explain why you're making the decision you're making without compromising information that isn't yours to share. You just have to make the call and absorb the friction. He nodded. He was a broker. He was understood. In his own smaller register, what it meant to hold information other people wanted. Just past 11 he stood, thanked me for the coffee, and moved toward the door with the subdued energy of a man who has been substantially revised and is still processing the renovation. At the door he paused. For what it's worth, he said, I think he was an idiot, Marcus. Yes, he wasn't an idiot, I said. He was just built for a different kind of life than the one I turned out to have. Derek nodded, said goodnight. I closed the door and stood in my quiet hallway and listened to the elevator take him down. Then I went to bed, and I did not think about Derek Mason for the rest of that night. I thought about the program. I should tell you about the program, because without it, none of the rest of this makes sense. Not the bidet daisy, not the title, not the name they gave me, not the reason that Patricia Howard looked at Derek the way she did and said what she said with the certainty she said it. The program was called, in the official documentation, the Integrated Sustainment Readiness Initiative. Nobody called it that. In the hallways and the conference rooms and the encrypted email chains, it was called ISRAR. And within ISRAR, the component I was responsible for was a $340 million line item that sustained the logistics infrastructure for a specific class of naval operations that I am not at liberty to describe in detail even now. This was 11 years ago. I was a GS-14 then, deputy to a director who was brilliant at the politics of the building and less brilliant at the numbers beneath them, which is not an unusual combination. The building runs on relationships and positioning and the careful maintenance of alliances across competing power centers. The numbers are what the relationships are arguing about, but not everyone who is good at the arguing is good at the numbers. The director, his name was Calloway, Richard Calloway, a man I respected in most of the ways that mattered, had signed off on a projection that was wrong. Not fraudulently wrong, not negligently wrong. Wrong in the way that projections become wrong when they are built on assumptions that were reasonable at the time and have since been overtaken by reality. The assumption in this case was that a particular class of maintenance contract would renew at its existing rate. It didn't. The vendor restructured. The rate changed. The change was buried in an appendix to a contract modification that had passed through 3 offices in 48 hours and landed on my desk on a Thursday afternoon in March. I read the appendix. I ran the numbers. I ran them again. The shortfall was $212 million over the next 18 months. Not a rounding error. Not a footnote. A number large enough that if it went unaddressed, ISRE would not survive the next budget cycle. The program would be cut. The logistics infrastructure it sustained would degrade. The operational impact of that degradation was, according to the classified assessments I had access to, significant. I went to Calloway that evening. He was not pleased, not with me. I want to be fair to him. He was not the kind of man who shoots the messenger. But he was the kind of man who had spent 30 years building a reputation and did not enjoy being told that a document with his signature on it contained a $212 million error. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Run it again." "I've run it 4 times. He looked at me across his desk. The desk was very large, government issue, stacked with the organized disorder of a man managing too many things simultaneously. Behind him, through the window, the Pentagon's interior courtyard was pale and gray in the March evening light. "If I take this upstairs," he said, "it won't just be my signature under review." "I know," I said. "It'll be yours too." "I know," I said again. He took it upstairs. What followed was 4 months that I do not entirely enjoy revisiting even now. An internal review, an external audit, 2 sessions before a subcommittee staff review in which I presented the corrected numbers and answered questions for a combined total of 9 hours across 2 days. My name appeared in documents I was not permitted to see. My judgment was questioned by people who had not read the appendix. My methodology was challenged by a senior official whose grasp of the underlying contracts was, in my professional assessment, inadequate, but who had 3 more years of seniority and considerably more comfort with the performative aspects of institutional power. Calloway stood behind the numbers. That mattered. That cost him something, and he paid it anyway, and I have not forgotten it. In the end, the program was restructured. The shortfall was addressed through a combination of reprogramming and a supplemental request that I wrote the justification for. 47 pages, every number sourced, every assumption documented, every risk quantified. The subcommittee approved it. ISRE survived. The logistics infrastructure held. 3 months after the approval, someone in the building started calling me the Ledger. I don't know who started it. I've never tried to find out. It arrived in my awareness the way nicknames do, suddenly present, already established, as if it had always been there and you simply hadn't been told yet. A colleague mentioned it casually in a hallway. Another referenced it in an email, half joking, then not joking. By the time Calloway said it to my face in a meeting, I'm going to need the ledger on this one. It had the weight of something official. Though it appeared on no official document, a ledger doesn't perform. It doesn't tell you what you want to hear. It holds what's true, and it holds it without apology. And when the moment comes that you need to know the real number, it is the only thing in the room you can trust. I have been called worse things. I sat in my reading chair long after Derek left, and I thought about those 4 months, and the 47 pages, and the 9 hours before the subcommittee, and the $212 million that I had refused to let disappear into an appendix that no one else had read. And I thought about the fact that I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Arlington with plain cotton curtains and a secondhand lamp, and I thought, yes, exactly, this is precisely right, Derek called the next morning. 7:52. I was at my kitchen counter with my first cup of coffee and the weekend edition of the budget summary I review every Saturday, a habit so ingrained that Veronica once told me it counted as a personality disorder. I let it ring twice before I picked up, not out of calculation, but because I was in the middle of a footnote. I want to apologize again, he said, properly. Not the version from last night, that one was still half shock. I mean an actual apology. I closed the summary. All right, I said. I was condescending. I walked into your home and I looked at it and I decided I understood your life before I'd asked a single real question about it. That was arrogant. And it was, he paused, looking for the word reductive. Of you. And I'm sorry for it. It was a good apology. Specific, undeflected, no qualifications trailing behind it like fine print. I've received enough inadequate apologies over the years to recognize a genuine one. This was genuine. Thank you, I said. I appreciate that. A pause. Can I ask you something, he said. You can ask. Did you know? Last night when I was saying all of it, did you know the whole time what you were going to say and when? I looked out my east-facing window. The morning light was doing what it does in October, arriving at a low angle that makes everything it touches look considered. Intentional, as if the world had taken time with its own composition. I knew what was true, I said. The timing was yours. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that might be the most unsettling thing anyone has ever said to me. I don't mean it to be unsettling, I said. I mean it literally. I don't manage conversations the way you manage a listing. I just wait until the information is necessary and then I provide it. The ledger, he said softly. The ledger, I agreed. We talked for another 20 minutes. He was different on the phone than he'd been at the restaurant. Less performed, less polished, the way some people become when they've been reduced to their actual components and have nothing left to arrange into an impression. I found I didn't dislike the person underneath the arrangement. That was its own kind of data point. Before he hung up, he asked if he could see me again. I told him I would think about it. I was not being coy. I genuinely needed to think about it. The confrontation, the real one, came 4 days later, not with Derek, with someone else entirely. His name was found out through a chain of events I did not initiate and could not have predicted, which is the only kind of chain of events I've ever truly believed in. Derek, in the days following our evening, had apparently mentioned our date to a colleague. The colleague had mentioned it to a contact. The contact worked in a shared professional network that, in the compressed geography of Northern Virginia's government-adjacent world, eventually traced back to a man named Gerald Pitts. Gerald Pitts was a senior executive service official in a neighboring agency. We had history. Not personal history, professional history, which in this city can be considerably more consequential. 3 years earlier, Gerald had been the opposing voice in a contentious interagency budget over a shared infrastructure fund that both our agencies drew from. He had argued, loudly and at length and in writing, that my analysis of the fund's sustainability was overstated, that my projections were pessimistic, that the methodology I was applying was, in his precise written language, not consistent with standard interagency practice. He had been wrong. The fund had depleted exactly as I projected, on the timeline I projected, for the reasons I had documented. The remediation process had been expensive and politically difficult, and Gerald Pitts had emerged from it, professionally diminished in ways that I had not sought and had not enjoyed. He had not forgotten. He called my office on a Tuesday. My assistant, a precise and loyal woman named Diane, who has worked with me for 7 years and possesses the protective instincts of a border collie, flagged the call before putting it through. "It's Gerald Pitts," she said, in the tone she reserves for things that require my full attention. "Put him through," I said. His opening was professionally cordial. It lasted approximately 45 seconds before it became what it actually was. "I've been hearing your name in some interesting contexts," he said. "I'm sure you have," I said. "It's a small city." "I heard you've been socializing with Derek Mason." I said nothing. "Silence is a tool. I have used it in rooms with generals and undersecretaries, and I am not above using it with Gerald Pitts. Derek Mason," he continued, "has a client. A development group looking at a parcel in Alexandria. A parcel that is adjacent to a property registered in your name." I sat with that for a moment. Not with alarm, with the specific quality of attention I bring to a document when I suspect its surface meaning is not its actual meaning. "Your point?" I said. "My point," Gerald said. And now the professional cordiality was gone entirely, stripped away to reveal the thing it had been covering, is that it's an interesting coincidence. A woman at your level, in your position, in contact with a broker whose client has interests adjacent to her holdings. Some people might find that worth examining. There it was, not a question, not even a genuine accusation. A suggestion. The kind of suggestion that is designed to do its damage not through any formal process, but through the act of being spoken. Through the knowledge that once a thing is said in the right rooms, it has a half-life that outlasts its accuracy. I knew this tactic. I had seen it used before. I had seen it used against people who deserved better, and I had seen them diminished by it, not because it was true, but because they had not known how to stand inside the fire of it without flinching. "I did not flinch, Gerald," I said, in the voice I use when I want someone to understand that what comes next is not a negotiation. I met Derek Mason at a charity event 3 weeks ago. I have been on 1 date with him. I was not aware of his client's interests, which are in any case entirely irrelevant to any aspect of my professional responsibilities. You know this. More importantly, you know that I know this. Silence on his end. "What I find interesting," I continued, "is that you called my office rather than submitting a formal inquiry, which is the appropriate channel if you have a genuine concern. The fact that you called informally suggests you don't have a concern. You have an intention, and the intention is to make me uncomfortable enough to become careful. Careful in ways that might slow me down, might make me smaller, might cause me to second-guess decisions I have every professional and ethical basis to make." I paused. "I want to be very clear with you. I have been the ledger for 11 years. I have survived 1 formal audit, 2 subcommittee reviews, 1 interagency dispute that you are personally familiar with, and a marriage that ended partly because my success made someone feel insufficient. None of those things made me smaller. This call will not either." Another silence. "Longer this time. This conversation didn't happen," he said finally. "Correct, I didn't." I hung up. Diane appeared in my doorway 30 seconds later with a fresh cup of coffee and the expression of a woman who had heard enough through a closed door to understand the shape of what had occurred. She set the coffee on my desk without a word. I picked it up. Outside my office window, the Pentagon's corridors continued their perpetual motion. The deliberate foot traffic of a building that does not stop, that has not stopped in the decades of my career, that will not stop after I am gone. The machinery of consequence moving forward regardless. I drank my coffee and went back to work. The thing about Gerald Pitts was that he miscalculated in the same way Derek had. Different men, different rooms, different versions of the same error. They both looked at what was visible, the apartment, the quiet manner. The woman who said, "I work for the government," and left it there. And they both decided the visible portion was the complete picture. They both built their strategies on that assumption. And they both discovered, at different moments and in different ways, that a ledger you haven't fully read is not a ledger you understand. Gerald's call on Tuesday was the opening move. By Thursday, I knew he'd made 2 others. The first was to a deputy in our shared oversight chain, a man named Harrington, whom I had worked with for 6 years and who called me himself on Wednesday afternoon to tell me, with the particular discomfort of someone delivering news they wish they didn't have, that Gerald had raised what he called a question of optics regarding my personal associations. Harrington is a careful man. He has survived a long career in government by being careful, by reading the wind correctly, by never standing directly in the path of a falling thing. But he is also, underneath the carefulness, a fair man. He told me what Gerald had said. He told me he didn't believe it merited formal review. He told me he wanted me to be aware. I thanked him and told him I appreciated the courtesy. The second call Gerald had made was to a retired SES official who ran a professional association we both belonged to, an annual dinner circuit kind of organization, the kind that matters more for its network than its stated mission. The retired official's name was James Okafor. I did not know Gerald had called James until James called me. James Okafor is 74 years old. He served 31 years in the civilian defense establishment, retiring as a deputy undersecretary, one of the most senior civilian positions in the department. He is a man of considerable stature and, more relevantly, considerable memory. He has attended every retirement ceremony, every promotion reception, every significant professional milestone in the careers of several hundred people over 3 decades. He remembers everything. He forgets nothing. In the building, among people who knew him, he was spoken of the way you speak of a reference text. Not always consulted, but authoritative when opened. He called me on Thursday morning. "Gerald Pitts called me," he said without preamble, in the direct manner of a man who has not had time for preamble in 31 years and sees no reason to start now. "I heard," I said. He suggested, "I might want to reconsider your nomination for the Professional Recognition Committee." The nomination had been submitted 6 weeks earlier. A peer recognition, the kind of thing that matters in this city not for its material value but for what it signals. Who is regarded? Who is trusted? Who is seen? "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him," James said slowly, "that I have known your work for 14 years, that I was in the room when Calloway brought the Israel correction upstairs, that I read your 47-page justification and found it the clearest, most precisely documented budget argument I had seen in a decade of reviewing such documents, and that if he had a formal concern regarding your conduct, he was welcome to submit it through the appropriate channel, at which point it would be reviewed and, in my assessment, dismissed." I was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, James." "Don't thank me," he said. "I told him the truth. That's not a favor. That's just accuracy." He paused, however. He said, "I think it may be useful for certain people to hear that truth in a larger room." The annual dinner was 3 weeks later. It was not a large event, perhaps 200 people. The compressed professional world of senior civilian defense gathered in a ballroom at a hotel in Crystal City that has hosted this dinner for 11 consecutive years, and will, I suspect, host it for 11 more. Round tables, centerpieces, the low ambient noise of people who work in the same building performing the social version of themselves for an evening. Derek was there. I had not known he would be. He attended as the guest of a colleague. His agency maintained a table, and he had been invited as a contact. the kind of peripheral attendance that happens in these circles when someone knows someone who knows someone. I saw him across the room early in the evening. He saw me. We exchanged a nod that contained approximately 400 words neither of us said aloud. Gerald Pitts was also there. He arrived late, took a seat 3 tables from mine, and spent the first hour of the evening with the careful, controlled energy of a man who has made a move and is waiting to see what the board looks like. James Okafor took the podium after dinner. He did not mention Gerald by name. He did not mention me by name, not at first. He spoke about the civilian defense workforce, about the people who are not in uniform, who do not carry rank insignia, who are not photographed at press conferences, but without whom the machinery does not run. He spoke about budget integrity, about what it costs, professionally and personally, to tell the truth when the truth is inconvenient, about the specific courage required to stand behind a number when powerful people are telling you the number is wrong. He spoke for 11 minutes. Then he said, "There is a woman in this room who, 14 years ago, read an appendix that 3 offices had passed over in 48 hours. She ran the numbers 4 times. She went to her director on a Thursday evening and told him the projection was wrong by $212 million. She wrote 47 pages justifying the correction. She sat before a subcommittee for 9 hours across 2 days and did not flinch once." He paused. "The program survived, the infrastructure held, and the name this building gave her, the name she has carried with the same quiet precision she brings to every number she has ever touched, is the ledger." He looked out at the room. "I want her to stand up." I did not want to stand up. I want to be honest about that. I am not a person who seeks the moment. I have spent 22 years specifically avoiding the moment, finding the work itself sufficient, finding the numbers their own reward. Standing up in a ballroom of 200 people while James Okafor speaks my name is not a thing I would have chosen. But Patricia had once told me, there are moments you don't get to decline. Not because someone is forcing you, but because declining would be a kind of dishonesty, a refusal to let the truth be as large as it actually is. I stood up, the room applauded. Not perfunctorily, genuinely, the sustained kind that means something, the kind that carries in it the weight of recognition from people who understand what they are recognizing. I stood for a moment that felt longer than it was. Across the room, I saw Derek. He was applauding with everyone else, but he was looking at me differently than everyone else. With the particular expression of a man who is reassembling something in his mind, reconfiguring a structure he thought he understood, finding it larger and more load-bearing than he had initially assessed. 3 tables away, Gerald Pitts was not applauding. He was looking at his water glass with the careful attention of a man who has discovered, too late, that the room he walked into was not the room he thought it was, that the woman he had tried to make smaller was, in fact, the one person in the building that the entire room had just risen for. I sat back down. My colleague beside me, a woman named Sandra who has worked 2 doors from my office for 9 years and knows everything and says very little, leaned over and said, quietly, without looking at me, "He's going to have a very long drive home tonight." I said nothing, but I thought, yes, he probably will. The apologies came in a particular order. Derek's came first, which I had expected. Gerald's came last, which I had not expected at all. Not because I thought him incapable of it, but because I had assessed him as a man who preferred to let things recede into institutional silence rather than name them directly. I was wrong about that. Or perhaps James Okafor's 11 minutes at the podium had rearranged something in him that I hadn't accounted for. Either way, it came, but Derek's was first, and Derek's was the one that required the most from both of us. He called the morning after the dinner, 8:04. I was in my reading chair with my coffee and a Saturday that had not yet made any demands on me, which is my favorite kind of Saturday, the kind that is simply a door left open, without obligation or itinerary on the other side. "I was there last night," he said. When I picked up, no preamble, "I know," I said. "I saw you." I heard everything James said. Good. A pause. Longer than the pauses from before. The kind that means a person is trying to find the beginning of a thing that has several possible beginnings and is not sure which one is honest enough. I want to say something, he said, and I want to say it right this time. Not the version where I apologize for the surface of what I did. The actual version. All right, I said. He took a breath. I heard it. The specific quality of breath a person takes before they say something they have been rehearsing and have decided to abandon the rehearsed version of. I sat in your apartment, he said, and I looked at your life, and I decided what it meant before I understood anything about it. And the reason I did that, the real reason, not the polished version, is that I needed you to be less than you are. Because if you were exactly what you turned out to be, then the way I'd been measuring people my entire adult life was wrong. And I wasn't ready for that. I was quiet. The apartment, he continued. The car. The furniture. I've spent 30 years in real estate telling people that what they own is who they are, that the address is the statement, that the upgrade is the arrival. I've said those things so many times that I started believing them about everyone, including myself. Including, he paused, women I met at dinner. It was the most honest thing he had said to me since we'd met. I sat with it for a moment the way I sit with a number that changes everything. Not rushing to respond, not filling the silence, just letting the weight of it settle where it needed to settle. Thank you, I said finally. Is that enough? He asked quietly. With genuine uncertainty for the apology, yes, that was enough, a pause. And for Derek, I said gently but clearly, the way you speak when you want someone to hear something without it becoming an argument, you are a man who looked at my home and saw a limitation. I understand now why you did it, and I believe you when you say you know it was wrong. But understanding a mistake and reversing its consequences are two different ledger entries. They don't automatically offset each other. Silence. I'm not saying never, I said. I'm saying not now. I'm saying that trust is a line item I build slowly and document carefully, and we are very early in the document. He made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something more rueful. You really do think in those terms, don't you? I think in the terms that have served me, I said. They've served me well. We talked a few minutes more. When he said goodbye, there was something in his voice that I recognized. Not defeat, not hope exactly, but the particular quality of a man who has been told the truth about himself and has decided to sit with it rather than argue with it. I respected that. I told him so. After I hung up, I sat in the reading chair for a long while with my cooling coffee, and the Saturday morning light moving across my floor the way it does in October, in long unhurried rectangles that shift almost imperceptibly, and then, when you look up, have moved entirely. Gerald Pitts's apology came 6 weeks later. It arrived in writing, which surprised me. A formal letter, printed on personal stationery, delivered through internal mail in an envelope I almost didn't open because it had no agency header, and I assumed it was a conference invitation. It was 3 paragraphs. The first acknowledged what he had done, named it specifically, without euphemism, without the bureaucratic language of non-apologies that populate professional correspondence like weeds in a formal garden. He had attempted to use informal channels to undermine my professional standing. He stated this plainly. The second paragraph said that he had, in the weeks since the dinner, reviewed the record of our interagency dispute 3 years earlier. He wrote that a thorough re-examination of the methodology had confirmed what he had refused to confirm at the time, that my projections had been correct, and his objections had been without sufficient foundation. He did not use the word wrong. He used the phrase, "it's not sufficiently supported by the evidence." But, in the language of men like Gerald, that is the same thing. I read it as such. The third paragraph said only, I should have known better than to underestimate the ledger. I regret that it took me this long to say so. I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in the drawer of my desk at home. The deep drawer on the left side where I keep the things I want to remember but not display. The things that belong to the private ledger, the one that isn't for anyone else's review. Veronica came to visit that weekend. She arrived Saturday morning with coffee from the place on Wilson Boulevard that we both prefer, and an overnight bag, and the specific energy of a woman who has been waiting several weeks for a full accounting and is now prepared to receive it. We sat at my kitchen table, the small plain table under the window that fits exactly 2 people and 1 coffee pot and a Saturday morning, and I told her everything. Derek, Gerald, the dinner, the letter. I told it in order, the way I tell things, without dramatizing and without abbreviating. She listened to all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and looked at me the way she has looked at me since she was 7 years old, and I was 11, and I had just done something she considered either very brave or very foolish, and was waiting to determine which. So, she said, Derek, I agreed. He apologized. Properly, he did. And you told him not yet. I told him it takes time to build a document. She looked at me over her coffee cup. Latoya, Veronica, you like him? I looked out the window. The morning was doing what October mornings do, arriving fully formed, clear and cool, as if it had been prepared in advance and was simply waiting for the right moment to present itself. I don't dislike him, I said. As it turns out, she made a sound that contained entire paragraphs. What? I said. Nothing, she said, smiling into her cup. Nothing at all. We sat in the small kitchen in the modest apartment that faces east and catches the morning light. And the coffee was good, and the Saturday was still open in front of us. And I thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that a life arranged correctly looks like nothing from the outside and like everything from within. A year later, almost to the day, October again. The light doing what October light does in Virginia, arriving at that low, considered angle that makes ordinary things look like they were placed deliberately, like the world took its time with the composition. The oak tree in the backyard of the Alexandria townhouse had dropped its first acorns of the season. My tenants' children had lined some of them up along the porch railing in a row, for reasons that were entirely their own, and that I found, when I drove past on a Saturday morning, quietly perfect. I didn't stop. I just slowed down, looked, and drove on. Some things you appreciate most in motion. Gerald Pitts retired in the spring. A quiet departure, a small reception, the standard certificate, the handshakes of people who were glad he had contributed and glad he was going. I sent a card, not because I owed him one, but because 22 years in this building has taught me that the way you behave toward people on their way out says more about you than the way you behaved when they still had leverage. I signed it simply with my name. Nothing more, nothing less. Harrington told me afterward that Gerald had mentioned the card to him, had seemed, in Harrington's careful diplomatic language, moved by the gesture. I noted that in the private ledger and closed the entry, Patricia had a health scare in February. Nothing final. A procedure, a recovery. 6 weeks of relative quiet in the 4th floor hallway that felt wrong in the way that absences feel wrong when you've grown accustomed to a presence. I brought her soup on Tuesdays. She told me the soup was too bland and that I had many exceptional qualities, but cooking was not among them. I told her she was welcome to make her own soup. She laughed, the laugh of a woman who has decided to be here for a while longer and is pleased about it. By March, she was back to her nightly ritual. Cheese crackers, ginger ale, 9 o'clock. The slow walk to the 2nd floor vending machine and back. I heard her footsteps resume in the hallway one evening and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't fully known was tight. Some things you don't know you're holding until you feel them release. Veronica was right about Derek. I want to say that plainly, because she will read some version of this eventually. She always does. In the way younger sisters find their way to the things you thought were private. And I want her to have the satisfaction of seeing it acknowledged in writing. She was right. We had coffee again in November. The month after the dinner, after the apology, after I'd told him to give me time, and he had given me time without asking how much or marking the calendar. He didn't push. He didn't disappear either. He sent a book in December, A History of Infrastructure Finance in Post-War America, that was either a genuine recommendation or the most considered act of courtship I had ever encountered, and I genuinely could not determine which meant it was probably both. I called him after I finished it. We talked for 2 hours. By January, we were having dinner again. By March, it was a pattern. By summer, it was a thing we didn't discuss the name of, but both understood the shape of. He is not a perfect man. He still talks about square footage with more enthusiasm than the subject strictly warrants. He still has a reflexive tendency to assess rooms before he's fully entered them, though now, when he catches himself doing it in my apartment, he stops and does something I find both amusing and genuinely touching. He looks at the bookshelf instead. The uneven third shelf. The worn copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God. As if recalibrating by returning to the evidence he should have read first, he is learning. Genuinely learning, which is the only kind that counts. I am, I'll admit, less closed than I was a year ago. Not open in the uncomplicated way. I don't think I will ever be uncomplicated, and I have stopped expecting that of myself. But there is a door that was fully shut that is now, on certain Saturdays, ajar. The light gets in. I've decided to let it. James Okafor called in September to tell me the nomination had been approved. I am on the recognition committee now. We meet quarterly. James runs the meetings with the efficiency of a man who has 31 years of practice and zero tolerance for agenda drift. I find this deeply satisfying. He asked me, at the first meeting, what I thought the committee's most important function was. I told him, accuracy. The recognition of what is actually there rather than what is easy to see. He looked at me over his reading glasses for a moment. That, he said, is why we needed you on this committee. I thanked him. He said, as he always says, don't thank me. That's not a favor. That's just accuracy. I am 49 now. 1 year further into a life that, from the outside, probably still looks modest. The apartment is the same apartment. The car is the same car. The plain cotton curtains have been washed and rehung, and are still, by any objective measure, plain. The second-hand lamp still works. The uneven shelf still holds. The 3 properties are still mine. Fully paid, fully occupied, fully documented. The young family in Alexandria painted the front door red, and I have decided I like it. The duplex in Baltimore has new tenants in the upper unit. A graduate student and her cat, whose name I have been told is Comptroller, which I consider an excellent name and have said so in writing. The house in the Shenandoah Valley is still mine alone. I still drive there on certain Saturdays. I still stand in the room that smells like pine floors and old fireplaces and the particular silence that accumulates in a place over decades. And I still think, yes, this. Exactly this. Derek has asked to see it. I told him not yet, but I'm thinking about it. People ask me sometimes, colleagues, younger analysts who are trying to understand the architecture of a long career, what it means to be called the ledger, whether I mind it, whether it feels like a limitation, being named for a document rather than a deed. I tell them this: a ledger doesn't inflate. It doesn't perform. It doesn't tell you what you want to hear or arrange itself to be admired. It holds what is true, every asset, every liability, every entry, every cost, and it holds those things without apology, without ornamentation, without needing the room to look at it and be impressed. When the moment comes that you need to know the real number, the ledger is the only thing you can trust. Not because it is the loudest thing in the room, because it is the most accurate. I have spent 49 years building a life on accuracy, on knowing the real number and refusing to misrepresent it, even when misrepresenting it would have been easier, even when the people holding power wanted a different figure, even when a man I was beginning to care about looked at my living room and decided he already understood everything it contained. The apartment is 12 minutes from my office. It faces east. The light finds me in the mornings without being asked. I own it outright. I own a lot of things outright. And the most important of them, the one that took the longest to acquire and that no market fluctuation has ever threatened, is the absolute, documented, fully verified knowledge of my own worth, not what I own, who I am. Older Americans understand this. People who have lived long enough to watch the visible things shift, the addresses, the titles, the balances, and have learned, through the slow accumulation of real experience, that the number that matters most is the one that doesn't appear on any external document. It's the one you carry, the one that was always accurate, even when no one else had read it yet. If this story meant something to you, if you recognized someone in it, or recognized yourself, share it with the person who needs to hear it tonight. They'll know why you sent it. And wherever you are listening from, whatever time it is there, whatever the October light is doing or not doing outside your window right now, I'm glad you were here.